Wake Up in Paradise, Chapter 3, Limbo. After spending many days in the public library reading about memory loss, experts who treated amnesia reached two conclusions. One was that the memory would return in almost all cases. Memory would come back slowly over a period of time, or something could trigger a total recall. In either case, the result was the same, and all that could be done was to wait. The second conclusion was that the memory would never return, or that it might take years, even a lifetime. If that was to be the case, it meant that Anne could be an old woman before she had her memory back, if ever. There was only one real alternative to her dilemma. She decided, make the best of it and get on with her new life. To do that, the resourceful young woman knew that she needed to make some money if she was going to be independent. She could not keep sponging off of Peda's family indefinitely. She had to find a job and pay her own way. Moreover, if she possessed any work skills, they would have to manifest on the job. Lying on the bed she shared with Peda, Anne mulled over her options. Peda would not be home tonight because she was with her fiancé Claude. Papa Cheval would not let the couple marry until Claude could provide a home for his daughter. That would be not able to build a home for Peda as yet. The two were saving their money together. In the meantime, they spent as many weekends as they could together. On Peda's return, Anne enjoyed hearing about the lovebirds' time together. It was like having a romance vicariously or listening to a continuing serial on TV. In the weeks that passed since the storm, Anne had spent all of her time in the bosom of Peda's family, shadowing the man while she worked among her healing herbs, minding little Covey, who was only 2, and still incessantly reaching his brown chubby arms up to be carried about. Trina's wife, Kim, worked at the straw market in one of the family's stalls when the cruise ships came in. She brought her 2 children to stay with the man for the day. Anne found a sense of purpose by entertaining the children and keeping them from harm or mischief. It gave her a feeling that she was earning her keep a little, though it was not enough compensation for all that she was receiving from them, and it definitely was not a permanent solution. The Cheval family had been more than generous, providing food and shelter to their guests. However, every member of the household worked very hard for enough money to keep the rather large, extensive family clothed and housed. The farm that Papa Cheval and his brother shared jointly was farmed by the whole clan. All shared in the bounty. However, much of the produce they grew was already plentiful on the island, and so cash crops were needed to supplement the growing number of households in the family. Still, there was a joy about them that was infectious. Every minor incident was an occasion for a celebration, and someone was always celebrating something, complete with a feast for anyone who wanted to come and participate in the food and fun. There was island drumming music for dancing, and often games like limbo pole that everyone could participate in, young and old. The Cheval family members were people that loved to have a lot of fun. With the exception of Renaud, who was little more than a teenager, Anne could not help but notice that they did not enjoy any of the leisure or recreation that the island supplied for the tourists year-round. Like most of the island inhabitants, they spent long hours each day working to supply the many services, island crafts, and delicacies the vacationing guest expected from this exotic paradise. The islands were a virtual trove of industry of every kind. Nothing was untapped as a potential source of income or practical use. Once dreaded reefs were now tourist attractions, with diving instructors for the novice and skilled alike. Glass-bottom boats showed the more timid the beauty of the undersea world, while vans drove tourists into the lava beds of the volcanoes. In addition, low-flying helicopters could be heard overhead, giving air-view tours of the beautiful terrain. There was enough service jobs on the island to employ twice the population, and most of the Cheval family was in service work. Peta and Renault worked at the Goulet Arms Hotel, which was one of the oldest on the island. Papa Cheval, who had been a fishing boat captain as a young man, now ferried a boat to several small outlying islands that had been reinvented for the tourists. One had outfitted as a smuggler's village, complete with treasure caves and pirates. It was quite a popular attraction. On other islands, there were private tennis courts, golf courses, scuba diving, and a jungle safari as well, with the restaurants and souvenir shops. Due to the availability of so many attractions and shops of an endless variety, Anne was confident she could easily find employment. When presented the idea, a large smile lit up Peta's face. She threw her arms around Anne's neck and bounced with happiness. "That's wonderful, Anne," she cried out, clasping her hands together behind her new cousin's back in exuberance. "That means you have decided to stay with us." "Well," Anne answered as she disentangled her arms to get her breath from Peta's bear hug, "I'll need a lot of help. Are y'all up for it? I can't do it without you." "We want you to stay, sister," Peta beamed. "Can't you tell? Even Papa likes you, and he was the hardest to convince, remember?" "He would have called the police right off, but my man wouldn't let him," Anne agreed. "I owe you and my man everything," she said. Her voice choked up with emotion as she gazed gratefully at her friend. "Well, you are one of us now, and you can go to work at the hotel with me. It's all okay," Peta replied. Renault had become a daily companion by now. He often invited Anne to accompany him on his foraging expeditions for wood in the tropical forests bordering the farm. He patiently explained to his companion the difference in the woods so that she could help him find the right pieces for the carvings that he created and sold to tourists. Most of his work was sold in the merchant stalls that his various cousins operated in the main market square. The talented young craftsman was becoming known for his beautiful bird and reptile designs. As a result, many of his pieces were going into shops on other islands. On these gathering expeditions, Renault entertained his willing helper with many interesting details concerning his family. Each day Anne was introduced to a different assortment of young cousins. They appeared on the beach at regular intervals to dive for sponges and coral and gather the shells and grasses for one of his aunt's colorful weavings and her intricate jewelry. The adopted cousin of this family began to think that the entire island might be populated by the Cheval family. Papa Cheval's older brother, Gerard, lived in the original plantation house of the Cheval family. Most of that elder brother's grown children and their respective families, as well as two of the sisters, lived on various parts of the land and usually ran the farm. Papa Cheval, Trinan, at times Peta and Renault also worked in the fields, when the sugar cane was cut and harvested. Rene's continuing complaint was that he did not want to be a farmer like his uncle and grandfather. He also did not intend to be a ferry operator like his father, or a mechanic like Trinan. The fact was, Anne suspected, the boy did not know what he wanted to do except take to the sea and leave the island. He wanted to travel the world. To accomplish this goal meant that he needed a lot of money, and he had many ideas of how to obtain that money. Listening to Renaud talking of his plans and dreams, Anne realized that she really liked this island boy. Something in his longing to break out of the mold that he had been cast into struck a chord in her. Then one day, while the two were stacking conch shells that Claude's father supplied for them from his surplus, Anne found to her dismay that Renaud liked her also, although not in the same way that she was fond of him. "If you don't soon remember, you go to the States, hunt your folk?" Renaud asked. He had been telling her about one of his schoolmates who had been to New Jersey to visit relatives. "I don't know," Anne answered, frowning. Renaud was asking what she had asked herself increasingly lately. "I like it here. This is all I know right now. Why?" She replied, evading the issue. "Y'all tired of me dogging and pestering already?" For a few minutes, Renaud just stared at his companion, and she realized he was trying to decipher what the meaning of her jest was. "I was just funning," she assured him. Lord, you would think they all spoke two different languages here, Anne thought. It was not the first time this had happened, although the island newcomer had become used to getting lost when the family spoke rapidly to each other in their own dialogue. Often the things she said were not understood either. Paida many times asked for an explanation of words that she used. "You don't leave, I be your man." "We?" Renaud said solemnly. The boy shook his head at Anne, his dark, liquid eyes burning with emotion. "I take good care of you." As the meaning of Renaud's words sank in Anne's brain, the blood drained from her sun-tanned face, leaving it a chalky gray. It was clear that the boy was really serious, and this was definitely an unforeseen turn of events. "I'm too old for you, Renee," Anne responded as gently as her confusion allowed. "None," he barked in a cry of anger and bobbed his head in denial. "You don't mean that." "I feel old, Renee," she insisted. "Too old for you." "I be grown. You see a man, none," the young man asserted. He spread his arms wide with the arrogance of a proud male. Anne looked at Renaud, her eyes slowly traveling over his face, so very like his brother Trinan. Both men were handsome, with a distinct look of their Creole heritage, like their mother. Renaud's face was fuller, softer, and more mobile, because he smiled constantly, and Trinan rarely. She studied him closely as he posed for her, his long curly hair up under a kerchief identical to her own. He could well have been one of the romantic pirates that spent long months on these shores only scant centuries ago. The bright sun glistened like sparkling beads on the moisture covering his burnished face, and his large, dark, soulful eyes were rimmed with thick jet lashes that any girl would envy. His youthling frame and the colorful loin wrap that the island men wore when they swam concealed very little of his maleness. Renaud thrust his chin out in defiance as Anne's eyes slid to connect with his, and a smile formed on her lips. She could not help smiling, because he really was so cute. Her gaze traveled to his wide shoulders and already muscled, defined chest, to his strong limbs, that she knew to be so powerful in the water. No, she decided, he was quite beautiful, and his body that of a man, not an adolescent youth, despite his age, she reluctantly admitted to herself. The truth was that island men rarely covered their torso when working. Anne had become used to the island semi-nudity and took no notice of the sight of exposed male or female skin, although she had observed that the women here were much more modest than that of their American and European visitors. However, here was this young man, barely out of his teens, asking her to see him in a way that she was not comfortable with. This absolutely would not do, she lamented. What had Peta said in the very beginning? Stick with your own kind. Anne remembered the tale of her namesake's mother. It ends sorrow in heart, none to stay the blood, Maman had said of her sister, sadly. There was a code of honor that she must respect. The Cheval family would not want her to let Renaud attach himself to her, despite the fact that she'd been adopted into the family and they treated her as one of them. She was an unknown person to them, a white woman from the American mainland, despite the attempts on her part to appear as an island-born member of the Cheval family. Renaud, Anne argued reasonably. I don't know who I am or if I already have a man. It was the first time for that thought to surface. However, she was desperate to let this boy keep his pride. Besides, Anne continued, half of the women here would hex me if I took the most handsome man on the island away from them, and Sally Ray would slip a bad potent in my drink. Renaud scowled angrily, and she hurried on before he could argue. Admit it, she coaxed. She comes over here to see you, sure as rain every day. She pointed her forefinger at him. No, don't deny it. I know how much you love it. I've seen you all together. The fierce eye relaxed into a confident smirk, and she pushed her advantage. You're gonna break her heart over me? If I remember, no, when, she corrected herself. I remember. I'll leave the island and go home. You know that. You think you be too good, Renaud responded bleakly. It was a statement unlike anything the proud young man that Anne had come to know would have ever uttered. No, she protested, distressed at his inference. Tears formed as she gazed at his dismal expression, feeling that she had failed in her attempt to salvage the situation. I wish I could make y'all understand how hard it is for me. Please, please don't stop being my friend, Anne begged Renaud. Renaud's angry expression collapsed at her pleading words. He shifted uncomfortably. Don't be mad, she added, tentatively putting her hand out to touch his arm that was held stiffly at his side. She took his hand, and she thought at first that he would push it away. However, he held it, and a smile appeared. I wait, Renaud said almost complacently. He turned, still holding Anne's hand, pulling her along beside him in the direction of the house. Things changed between the two of them in the months that followed. Renaud no longer played pranks or teased Anne like an overgrown puppy. He saved that kind of attention for Sally Ray and his many female admirers, some of them from his own family. One day, while in town, Anne saw Renaud flirting outrageously with two beautiful Asian sisters. Peta informed him that the sisters' names were Zandera and Tana Chow Li. Their father owned import stores on the islands. Both girls seemed quite smitten with Renaud and not the least bit jealous of his unbiased attentions to them both. The same was not true of Sally Ray. She was intensely jealous of any attention or time Renaud spent on any one other than herself. Her eyes followed him with such abject adoration it was almost painful to watch. Anne began to hope that soon Renaud would put the love-smitten girl out of her misery and give her what she so plainly wanted, his whole, undivided attention. With amused delight, she contemplated the two of them one evening, laughing and flirting with each other on the porch. Sally Ray literally could not keep her hands off of Renée. He wanted her too, however. For some reason known only to himself, he seemed to be playing a hard-to-get game with her. Watching the two from her concealed spot behind the parlor window, Anne felt comforted about the rift that was now present between Renaud and herself. The couple looked so beautiful together and right for each other. A feeling of loneliness swept over Anne. She longed for someone of her own to love, someone to make her feel like she imagined the two on the porch were feeling. Mates, meant for each other, at home in each other's arms. With a resigned sigh, Anne turned away, beginning to feel like a peeping Tom. It was time for her to have her own life. She had to find her own home. Her time of limbo had come to an end. Gaining employment at the Goulet Arms Hotel was the first step of Anne's plan, and almost as easy as Paida predicted. The identification that belonged to the real Angelina Pierce was processed without question, and her career as a hotel maid began immediately that very first day. The only disappointment had been when Anne found that she and Paida were not assigned to work together. A thin, pale woman named Natasha Kennard was put in charge of training the new floor maid. The head supervisor of all the maids was a surprise to Anne. The woman looked out of place among the brown-skinned population of the native islanders. She had almost white lashes and pale brows that matched her hair. Her skin was so pink the color was reflected in her eyes, encased in thick glasses. When Anne saw her, she immediately wondered what in the world was the woman doing living and working on a sun-drenched tropical island. Anne soon became comfortable enough with a woman to ask her that very question. It was a simple story. Natasha met and married a man in her native country of Denmark. This man came from the islands. When his university days ended and he came home to Goulet Island, she came with him. They now had 4 grown children, and Natasha insisted that she was not in the least homesick and never regretted her choice. At the end of each week, as her weekly earnings began to grow, Anne determined that by saving as much of her wages as possible, she would soon have enough money to be on her own. The plan was that when she regained her memory, she would have enough saved for her airfare wherever that destination was. Admittedly, it was an incomplete plan at best. However, having a plan helped the uncertainty of her future and made it a little less anxious. Many nights when Paida lay beside her new roommate, dropping off to sleep instantly as she always did, Anne was unable to sleep. Clutching her pillow to her chest, she removed to the empty porch. There she dozed fitfully, wondering if she had always had difficulty sleeping. When she did sleep, her dreams did not give her any peace of mind, and at times when she woke, she tried to recapture them. The effort was always futile.